Hello Flexi friends. In today's 45-minute starting splits class, we're going to specifically be working on our middle splits and our straddles, both of which have a little extra emphasis on our inner thigh flexibility, a little bit of hamstrings, and strengthening our glutes as well to get our legs a little bit wider in these positions. Perhaps that will be helpful. You will definitely want some kind of chair or bench, something you can sit on for some of the exercises, especially if you're more on the tighter hip side and your hips are far away from the floor in your middle splits. Yoga blocks are also handy for many of the exercises. They are optional, but they will make things a little bit more comfortable. And if you're interested in regular flexibility training, I strongly encourage you to get some blocks. That said, let's dive into our warm-up. Our warm-up today is going to be very hip focused, particularly on our glutes, inner thighs, and a little bit of a hip rotation. So we're going to start out with a couple variations of squats. First, sumo squats, taking our feet nice and wide, feet pointing out about 45 degrees. Keeping my torso lifted as I bend those knees, squatting down. It's coming on up. Does not really matter how low you're squatting. You can keep these a little shallow if this is a challenging range of motion. You can take them a little deeper if this is feeling good. What I really care about is that you're keeping your knees behind your toes, that your feet aren't so close together. Your knees are falling past our toes. And I also want you to think about pulling the outsides of your knees backwards, so you're starting to feel a little bit of a stretch in those inner thighs as we're squatting on down. We're gonna do another 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Hang out in that low squat, keeps your hips low. We're gonna try to flutter our knees backwards like little butterfly wings for 10 seconds. Tiny little shakes, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead, shake out those legs. And we're gonna work a little bit on our hip rotation in our squat. So depending on your hip flexibility, this may look a little bit different in your body. We're gonna come back down to that low sumo squat. I'm gonna lift up my left heel, rotate my left thigh so that my knee is starting to drop down towards the floor. This is where it's gonna look different in different bodies. Some of you, your knee's only gonna move a little bit. Some of you, you're gonna be able to get your knee all the way. Don't worry about making it big. We're just doing a little bit of movement for our warm-up. So we're gonna rotate our thigh towards our midline, dropping that knee. Try to keep your hip bones forward. So we're not gonna twist into a lunge. We're internally rotating our thigh. We're gonna bring that knee back to neutral, drop that heel. Lift our left knee, drop that knee, rotating our thigh towards our midline, lift our thigh, drop that heel. So we're gonna go side to side a couple of times. So these might be small rotations, just bringing your knee in a smidge. Some of you might be able to make these quite big, taking your thigh all the way internally rotated. Don't worry about how big it is. We're gonna do another 2, 2, 1, and 1. Go ahead and shake it out. Give those quads a break. Take your feet a little closer together. We'll go through some hip circles in one direction. And hip circles in the other direction. And we'll do knee circles out to the sides. You can have your arms out to the sides for balance. You can have your hand on something for balance. Then we'll switch directions. Take those knee circles to the inside. One more on each leg. Then we'll roll out our ankles. You can either keep your toes on the floor while you circle that heel, or you can do foot in the air while you circle those toes. And reverse directions. We'll switch feet, roll out our other ankle. And switch directions. You can give everything a little bit of a shake. So for some of our conditioning for our glutes and our inner thighs, the fronts of our hips, we're gonna do some around the world leg extension. For these, you can do them in the middle of the room, or if balance is feeling challenging, you can have your hand on something for support. We're gonna start with all of our weight in our right leg, lifting our left knee, kicking that left leg all the way straight. So depending on your hip flexor strength, your flexibility here, some of you might be able to have that leg super high. If you can't get your leg all the way straight, keeping that knee really high, drop that knee. I want the leg to go all the way straight, even if your foot's staying a little lower to the ground. Keeping that leg straight, we're gonna open it out to this side while we keep our hip bones forward so my hips are not following that leg. This is gonna take a little squeeze in those glutes. We're gonna bend that knee, bring it back to the front. We're gonna 5 times together. So lifting that left knee, kick the leg straight, keep it straight while we open, bend, and reset. Here for another 4, 3, and if you want these to be harder, you can try to lift that knee higher as you kick. If you need it to be easier, drop that knee a little bit lower. As long as you're feeling that nice squeeze through the quad, that's what we care about. Good, that was 5, shake it out. Same leg, we're just gonna switch directions. Starting with our knee open up out to the side. Hip bones are pointing forwards. They're not starting to open towards that knee. You're gonna straighten that leg, and we're gonna bring that leg to the front. It's a little squeeze through the inner thigh, bend, and reset. So the higher your knee is, the harder these are. The lower the knee, a little bit easier. Pick something that feels appropriately challenging. We'll do 3 more together. 3, 2, and last one. Go ahead, shake up that leg. We're gonna switch sides, so all of our weight in our left leg. Lifting our right knee, kicking it forwards. Keep it straight as we open that leg out to the side. Hip bones still point to the front. Bend and reset. 4 more. 3, 2. Last one to the outside. Go ahead and take a shake break if you need it. We're gonna do 5 to the inside. So starting with our knee opening out to the side, just like the tree pose in yoga. Kick that leg straight. Keep it straight while we bring that leg to the front. And reset. My hip bones stay pointing forwards and level the whole time. Got 3 more. 2. Whoop. And last one on this leg. Go ahead, shake it out. Now I'm done. A little bit of a warm up for the front of our mitts, hips, insides and outsides of our hips. Let's do a little bit for our hamstrings. So for this next exercise, we're gonna do some wide-legged good mornings, so doing them in a bit of a standing straddle shape. Don't want you to go to your maximum stretch in this position just yet. We'll do this again later, sitting on a chair. For now, I only want you to find like a 50% intensity stretch. So we're gonna take our feet a little bit wider than hip distance. I'm gonna show you what this looks like sideways so that you can see what my back and my pelvis is doing. So starting with my feet far apart, if you're someone who's got tighter hips, go ahead, bend your knees a little bit. If you've got relatively flexible hamstrings, you're welcome to keep your legs straight to make this more challenging. But for you beginners out there, bend your knees. Bending your knees, you're still gonna get a really nice stretch in those hamstrings, I promise. So from this position, I'm gonna keep my back nice and flat, and I'm gonna lean forwards, and I wanna make sure that I'm leaning forwards from my hips and not from my back. So find the little bony parts, your hip points sticking out in the front of your hip. I want you to take those hip bones and start to rotate them down towards the floor. As I'm tilting my hips forwards, I'm lifting my tailbone. The rest of my back is staying nice and flat. So I am not reaching with my arms and my chest. I am leaning forwards from my hips. You can also imagine you're sticking your butt out behind you. This is very similar to a good morning or a deadlift for those of you who do strength training. So we're gonna lean forwards as much as you need to find a comfortable hamstring stretch. So don't go as far as humanly possible. Stop at like 50% of your max. For folks with tighter hamstrings, your 50% might look like this. That is okay. We're still just warming up. So once we find that stretch, our hamstrings are just a little bit longer. We're gonna push into our feet. This contracts our hamstrings. As we lift our torso on up. So I'm gonna start letting my butt drift back, rotating my pelvis forwards, push into those feet. Feel that tension in those hamstrings as they contract as we lift our torso. Do this 8 more times. If you want this to be more muscly, instead of leaning into a deeper stretch, because I still only want you to be in that like 50% length of those hamstrings, you can reach your arms out to the side, or you can reach your arms all the way overhead, as long as you're keeping your back flat. This is making the lever longer in relation to our hips. Makes those hamstrings work a little harder. I think this is number 5, maybe 4. We might do around 10. Does not have to be exact. All right. 2. And last one. Good, go ahead, push into those feet. Come on up to standing. Shake it out. Now that we're warmed up, we've kind of hit our hips in a couple different ranges of motion. Let's move on to some of our other exercises. For our next couple of exercises, we're gonna want a chair or some kind of raised platform to sit on. Something that's sturdy, like a stiff chair or a bench, is gonna be a little bit easier to do this on than something that's squishy, like a bed or a couch. But if that's what you've got, I would still suggest using those because we want our hips to be nice and high in the air. So for this next exercise, this is gonna be brief. We're gonna do what's called a nerve glide for our sciatic nerve, which is one of the nerves that runs down the back side of our leg. And occasionally, if you're someone who has a little sciatic nerve tension, that can make any kind of forward folds or hamstring stretches, like when we're leaning forwards in our straddle, for our straddle pancake, a little bit uncomfortable. So we're gonna help that nerve slide back and forth between our legs before we do any kind of deeper hamstring work. So what this is gonna look like, I'm gonna sit on the edge of my chair, keeping my back nice and flat, so you can hold on to your chair for balance. Maybe you take your hands behind your back to keep you from slouching and rounding forwards. I'm gonna kick out my right leg in front of me, right leg nice and straight, toes pointed. I'm gonna flex the foot while I look up towards the ceiling, point the toes, drop my chin to the chest. Flex the foot, look up, point the toes, look down. We're gonna do this 10 times. And this can be fast. What we're doing is giving that nerve a little slide back and forth between all of the soft tissue in our legs. And we don't want to feel any stretch in this position. So if you're feeling a hamstring stretch, I want you to lean back a little bit. If you're not feeling a stretch, perfect. Our goal is not to be stretching your muscles just yet. So once you've done about 10, maybe 15 tops of those, shake out the right leg. We're gonna do the same thing on our left leg. So sitting up with our back nice and flat, kicking our left leg straight. If this gives you a hamstring stretch, go ahead and lean back a little bit until that stretch goes away. We're gonna flex the foot, look up towards the ceiling, point the toes, tuck our chin to the chest. About 10 times, maybe up to 15, if this is feeling okay. Breathe in, making sure my back is staying nice and flat. And that's 3, 2, and 1. Go ahead and shake out that left leg. All right, now that our nerves are moving a little bit more in our legs, let's move on to some more muscly type flexibility work. We're gonna do some seated straddle pancake good mornings. But now that we've warmed up our nerves and our hips are a little warmer, we can find a deeper stretch than when we were doing our standing ones just a moment ago. So sitting in your chair, I want you to take your legs out to a wide straddle. And this can be as wide as feels comfortable on your inner thighs. So if you've got really flexible inner thighs, your feet are gonna be really far apart. If you've got tighter inner thighs, your legs are gonna be in a much narrower pizza slice. It's all good. For folks who have more flexible hamstrings, you can also do this next exercise on the floor, but I will demo it on a chair for folks who've got tighter hips. So we're gonna open our legs out to the side. Your feet can be pointed, they can be flexed. You can really let your ankles do whatever's the most comfortable. I'm gonna start with my hands on my hips, legs mostly straight. If you have very tight inner hamstrings and inner thighs, you can bend your knees. That'll make this a teeny bit easier, but I'll demo it with straight legs. Keeping my back flat, I'm gonna start to rotate my hip bones forwards, lifting my sits bones a little bit away from that chair, leaning forwards as far as I need to, while I have my back flat until I feel that stretch in my hamstrings. So for folks with really tight hips, you might have a very small lean forwards. Unless you bend your knees, you're welcome to lean farther. But our goal is to feel a deep stretch in your hamstrings, something that's like an 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 intensity, really feeling that super deep stretch. Once you feel that stretch in your hamstrings, we're gonna push our feet into the ground, feel those hamstrings contract as we lift our torso on up. Do 10 of those total. Keeping hands on your hips would be option 1. To make this a little harder, a little more muscly, you could reach arms out to the side. Or harder still would be arms totally overhead. We'll do 10 together. I'll be doing hands on hips, leaning forwards enough to feel that stretch in our hamstrings, really trying to tilt our hip bones forwards, and then pushing into those feet, feeling the hamstrings contract as we lift. Leaning forwards, nice flat back, nice flat neck for 9. 8, pushing into those feet every time we lift our torso. 7. So what we're doing is we're lengthening those hamstrings as we lean forwards and tilt our hip bones forwards, and we're contracting them while they're in that lengthened position to make them a little bit stronger. This is 5, 4, 3, 2. And this next time that you're leaning forwards, go ahead and take your hands to your inner thighs for support, or to the floor if your butt is on the floor, and we're just gonna hold our forward fold for a couple of moments. Keeping your back flat. So if you've got really tight hamstrings, your forward fold might be really small. Even if your knees are bent, that's fine. As long as you're feeling that stretch, the underside of your hamstrings, that's what we're going for. Taking a couple breaths. And go ahead and slowly sit on up. Shake out your legs if they need a little bit of a shake break. And then we just did some strengthening for our hamstrings while we were giving them a stretch. Now let's strengthen our hip flexors, the front of our joint. These are the helpers that when they contract, our hamstrings have to relax. So that'll help us in our forward folds as well. For this next exercise, I'll also demo it on a chair, but you can do this sitting on a block on the floor or with your butt on the floor if you've got happier hamstrings. I'm gonna have 2 yoga blocks on the floor, the inside of my legs from one I am in a straddle. So sitting on the chair, look something like this. If you're on a block, it's gonna look something like this. Or if you have very happy hamstrings, you're welcome to do this with your butt on the floor, as long as when you're sitting down, your back is nice and flat and you don't round your back in this position. All right, for the purposes of our video today, I'll show it sitting in a chair for folks who've got a little bit tighter hips. So what we're gonna be doing is sitting with my back nice and flat, legs straight. Go ahead and point your toes just for this one. It's gonna engage some of the muscles in our calves, the undersides of our legs. Quads are gonna engage to keep our knees straight. I'm gonna hold on to my chair for balance. I'm gonna lift my legs up over those blocks and out over those blocks. If it feels really hard to lift those legs, particularly for folks who are sitting on the floor, go ahead and lean back a little bit. Plant your hands behind you. It's gonna make it easier to lift those legs up. If you would like this to be harder, you can lean forwards. Especially if you're on the floor, you can take your hands to the insides of your hips. But folks on the chair, you can make your blocks higher. It's gonna make this a little bit harder for you, so you're lifting those legs a little higher. So we're engaging the muscles through the front of our hip, getting a little bit of engagement through those glutes as those legs come out, a little bit of engagement through those inner thighs as those legs come in. And our goal is to do 10 total, so 5 in, 5 out. We'll do another 3 together. 3, 2, and 1. Next time we take those legs wide, we're gonna plant our heels, keep your back flat, forward fold. Finding our hamstring stretch. You may also feel a little stretch in those inner thighs. That's okay. Taking a couple breaths here, letting the front of our hips relax. They don't have to squeeze anymore. Breathe in. This is our passive stretch. Gravity's doing all the work. 10 more seconds. 9, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Go ahead, come on out. Shake out those legs. Next up, we're gonna do a couple rounds of horse stance. I'll show this both facing the camera as well as sideways so you can see what this looks like in our body. Let's talk about how to get into it, and then once we do that, we can do it all together for time. So our horse stance looks a little something like this. It's kind of like a wide-legged squat with our legs a little bit bent, but not quite. So what we're gonna do to get into this is kind of John Wayne, walk your legs really far apart. You're gonna bend your knees, stick your butt out by lifting your tailbone. So we're not gonna keep our tailbone tucked here. We're gonna get a little bit of an arch through that low back. And then to see how wide we can get our legs, we're gonna take our toes to the outside, then our heels. Toes and then heels, sinking a little bit lower each time. Our end position, I want toes facing forwards, not to the outside, way our ankles are in a more neutral position. So this is what it looks like from the front, trying to keep my torso lifted. This may feel like a stretch in the inner thighs, may feel like a stretch in the underside of those thighs. From the side, we look a little bit like this. So again, butt is sticking out, tailbone and T that lifted, not tucked underneath. So first we're gonna do this for 20 seconds. Not the longest hold in the world, but if you've never done horse stance before, you're probably gonna feel it. That's okay. We're gonna do 2 holds. First 20 seconds, second one will be 30 seconds for a challenge, but we'll take a little break in between. So when you're ready, start taking those legs out to the side, bend your knees, lift your tailbone. This is tilting our pelvis forwards just a little bit. And then you can start heel toeing your feet out, so wide as they can comfortably go, where you still feel balanced with our toes pointing forwards. We'll hold for 20 seconds and just breathing through, hanging out. This is a really nice strengthener for our inner thighs or our hamstrings, a little bit for some of those glutes and rotators as well. Last 3, 2, 1. Go ahead, come on out, shake out your legs. See, 20 seconds, not so bad. All right, round number 2, we're gonna do 30 seconds, a little bit of a longer hold. Maybe you can take your legs a little bit wider if that first round is feeling easy. So, walking our legs as far apart as they'll comfortably go. Bend those knees, tilt our pelvis forwards, keep our torso lifted. You can heel toe your feet a little farther apart. We're gonna hold for 30 seconds. Taking a couple breaths. So very flexy folks, your feet might be quite far apart. Folks with tighter hips, this might just look like a funky version of your sumo squat. It's okay. We're here for another 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Go ahead, slowly come on out. Shake out your legs. Triple ankle circles if that's challenging on your ankles. And then let's take it down to the floor. So particularly when we talk about working on our inner thigh flexibility, it's important for 2 muscle groups to be strong. Of course, we want our inner thigh muscles, our adductors, to be nice and strong while they're in this nice lengthened position. That's what communicates to our body that this is safe, and then our legs can go a little bit wider, that our muscles can still do work. It's also helpful to be strengthening our glutes while we're in our open leg flexed hip position, because our glutes are what are responsible for pulling our legs farther apart. So the stronger our glutes are in this position, when they're usually in a little bit of a shortened position, which is challenging for them, the more they can help pull our legs farther apart in our straddle. But even in our middle splits, when we have gravity helping to drop our hips, the stronger our glutes are, the more they can slide those legs a little bit farther apart. So let's do a couple strengthening exercises for our glutes while we are in a hip flexed and abduction range of motion, meaning opening our legs to the outside. My favorite drill for this are variations of fire hydrants. It's possible you've done some of these before in your strength training life, but we're gonna start. I like doing these kneeling on a yoga block. It makes the range of motion a teeny bit easier, but if you don't have a block, you can absolutely do these on the floor. I'm gonna start in a tabletop position with my left knee on the block. You'll see that this makes it a lot easier to move my right leg around. Yeah, palms on the floor. If your wrists get a little tired when you're doing this, You can make fists to flatten those wrists, take a little bit of pressure out. It's gonna be totally fine. We're gonna try to keep our hips level, meaning both of the front of our hip bones are gonna stay pointing towards the floor. As we lift the right knee to the outside of our hip, this should feel like a nice squeeze in those glutes, and then drop that knee back down. So what we wanna avoid doing is lifting the knee and lifting our hip bones. You can see that my hip bones are now very attractively pointing towards the camera, and it's very much of a crotch shot. I want you to keep your crotch towards the floor. So my butt is staying totally level. Both of my butt cheeks are in line. The back of my hips are in line. So these might be really small lifts. I'm gonna do 8 to 10 on the right leg. Taking a couple breaths. And this double checking that your right hip isn't lifting as you're lifting that right knee. Got about 3 more depending on how fast you're going. And you don't have to match my speed. You can do these at your own pace. All right, next one can be your last one on the right leg. Go ahead, shake it out for a moment. I'm gonna switch sides, rotate so that you can see okay. So if you're using a block, we're now gonna have a block under our right knee. Left knee is gonna be free to lift to the outside. So keeping both of my hips nice and level. I'm gonna lift my left knee to the outside, bring it on back. Open it out to the side, bring it back. We're aiming for 8 to 10 of these. Sometimes the second side's a little bit more challenging because those glutes are already pre-fatigued from doing a little bit of stabilization in the first side. So if you need a little bit of a longer break in between, that is okay. Let's do 4, 3, 2, and 1. Go ahead, shake out that leg. Give your hips a break for a moment. Now for round number 2 for our fire hydrants, we're gonna add some hip rotations. This makes it a little bit more challenging. So starting with our left knee on our block, right knee ready to open up out to the side. I'll show what this looks like from 2 different angles, and then we'll do 8 to 10 together. So just like our regular fire hydrants, I'll lift that right knee out to the side, feeling that nice squeeze in my right glutes. Then I'm going to externally rotate my thigh, meaning my thigh is starting to rotate towards the ceiling by dropping my toes towards the floor, trying to keep my knee in the same spot in space. Then I'm gonna internally rotate that thigh, rotating my thigh down towards the floor. Again, trying to keep my knee in the same spot. Bring that thigh back to neutral. Now it's pointing towards the front of my mat. Close those legs. So, saying this another way, we're gonna lift our knee, keep the knee in the same spot while we drop our toes, lift our toes, bring our toes back in line with the knee, close that leg. What this kind of looks like from the front, lifting our knee out to the side, dropping our toes, lifting our toes, bringing them back in line with that knee, closing that leg. The one thing we want to avoid doing is lifting our knee, swinging it around wildly as we're doing our toe drops and lifts. Your challenge is going to be trying to keep that knee at that nice lifted height. That's going to make this a little bit more challenging and work on those rotator muscles a little bit more. So we're going to do 8 to 10 on the right leg, then we will switch sides. So assuming your tabletop position, we'll lift our right knee out to the side, keep the knee in the same spot while we drop our toes, and then try to lift those toes. And this may be really small. Bring that knee back down. So if you've got tighter hips, your toes might not even touch the floor all the way. They might barely be moving an inch in either direction. For folks with a larger range of motion, it might be easier to drop those toes and lift your toes. Don't worry about the size. Just try to do this one with control. Do about 5 more. 4, 3, 2. Last one. Shake it out. Go ahead, shake out that left leg too. I know those glutes are probably a little burning as well. And let's switch sides. So if you're using a block, now our right knee is going to be on the block. Left knee is free to do all of the lifting. So now we're working on our left glutes, left outer hip. So lifting our left knee out to the side, trying to keep that knee lifted. What a tongue twister. Dropping those toes as far as you can, Lifting those toes up as far as you can. Bring that chin back to neutral. Close that knee. 7 to 9 more times, shooting for 8 to 10 total. Taking a couple breaths, making sure you're not holding your breath as you're doing this. And also checking in, making sure that left hip bone particularly is staying low and you're not opening your hips all the way to the side as we're lifting that knee, just like our regular fire hydrants. Good, about 4-ish more. 3, 2, and last one. Go ahead, shake it out. Shake out both your legs. We're gonna give our sweet, sweet glutes a break. Come down to lying on your back. Now we'll do a little active flexibility work for our inner thighs. So starting, lying on our back, both knees bent, feet just hanging out on the floor. I'm gonna lift my left knee bent 90 degrees, and I'll show a couple of options for this next exercise. Option number 1, knee is bent, starting with my left knee right on top of my left hip. I'm gonna let that knee start to drift out to the side, keeping it in line with my hip, so I'm not gonna drop that knee towards the bottom of the mat. I'm not pulling it up towards my shoulder. It's sticking out to the side of my hip. You should feel a little bit of a stretch in your left inner thigh, and then we're gonna bring that knee back to start. So what we're doing is we're lengthening those muscles in our inner thigh, and as you bring your knee back, they squeeze a little bit to do that work. What I want you to make sure is that your hip bones stay in the same spot. We want our hip points pointing up towards the ceiling. Sometimes there's a tendency for our hips to rotate when we bring that knee to the side, particularly if you have tight inner thighs. So if you're like me and your hips like to cheat, you can use your hands to hold your hips in place as you're opening that knee out to the side. For folks who want a little bit more of a challenge, we can add on to this. As you open that knee to the side, you can karate kick your leg straight, getting a little bit more of a stretch in that inner thigh. This also makes your leg a little bit heavier, which sometimes can help with that stretch. We'll bend that knee, bring it back to start. So opening that knee, straighten the leg, bend, bring it back to start. Option number 3, for folks who are pretty comfortable with your inner thigh stretches. You can do this with your leg straight the whole time. If you've got tight hamstrings, you can have it kind of straight. It'll still be a little bit more intense of a stretch. So opening that leg out to the side, double checking that both of your hip bones are pointing towards the ceiling. You can also think about keeping both butt cheeks on the floor. Bring that leg back to the middle. We'll do 10 on the left leg together, 10 on the right leg together, and then move on. So starting with your left knee bent, kind of straight, all the way straight. You get to pick the position. Opening that leg out to the side, feeling your stretch, closing it back towards your midline. Here for 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Go ahead and shake out that left leg. We'll switch sides. I have to actually turn around because I'm very close to my wall. You can stay in the same spot if you'd like. This time lifting our right knee, either keeping the right knee bent the whole time, maybe adding your karate kick to the bottom, or you can have your right leg a little straight or all the way straight if you want an extra challenge. We're gonna open the right leg out to the side for 10, close it back to the middle. 9, lengthening those inner thigh muscles, making them contract as we bring that knee back towards our midline. 6, 5, double checking that your hip bones are staying anchored on the floor. Hip bones aren't moving, just our leg is moving. 4, 3, 2, and last one. Good. Go ahead, shake out both those legs. Give them a break. Now that we've done all sorts of conditioning for our inner thigh muscles, our hamstrings, our hip rotation, let's start diving into some of our straddle and middle split work. I'm going to show these seated on a yoga block, but you can modulate these to make them more or less difficult for you. So for our straddle, for people with very happy hamstrings, you can just come to a straddle on the floor. If you're folks who have tighter hamstrings and it's really hard to sit up with a flat back with your butt on the floor, or you feel like you can't lean forwards at all, this is going to be a lot more comfortable sitting on 1 or 2 yoga blocks. And for folks with tighter hips, you can absolutely do these sitting on a chair. So just like some of the drills that we were doing in the beginning of class, the higher you lift your hips, the easier it is going to be doing some of this forward fold work. So for you folks who have a little bit tighter hips, go ahead, sit your butt on a chair, and you're welcome to bend your knees as long as you're still feeling a stretch in your inner thighs or your hamstrings while we're doing these forward fold exercises. So starting in your comfortable straddle, you can see I am sitting on a yoga block. We're going to open our legs as wide as they'll comfortably go, feeling a little bit of a stretch in our inner thighs. You may or may not already be feeling a stretch in your hamstrings. Don't worry if your legs don't go really far. This is still valuable to work on, even if you have a very narrow pizza slice with your legs. If any of these exercises cause any discomfort in your knees, I would suggest bending your knees, or if you're low enough to the ground, you can physically support your knees by putting blocks underneath them. That often makes this a little bit more comfortable. But first up, we're just going to explore a range of motion in our forward fold. So keeping our thighs and our knees and our shins rotated towards the ceiling, keeping our back flat. I'm going to lean forwards. And just like when we were doing our forward folds when we were standing, I want you to really try to initiate the forward fold from our hip bones, from our pelvis. Finding the bony parts on the front of your hip, the little hip point, this is your iliac crest on each side. We're going to try to reach those hip bones towards the floor. The rest of my back is just coming along for the ride. So what that looks like from the side is starting to tilt my hips forwards. You can even see my butt is starting to lift just a teeny bit away from my block, as opposed to reaching with our arms, which is going to round our back. Sometimes this gives a lot of uncomfortable pressure in our low back, and this is not giving me any of a better stretch. And this, in this position, I actually feel more of a stretch in my hamstrings and those inner thighs. So finding your version of a straddle pancake, pancake being we're pancaking ourselves towards flat, towards the floor. Let's add a little bit of movement. We're going to walk our hands over to one leg, hang out in the stretch over here just for a brief moment. Walk your hands back through the middle, over the other leg. For folks sitting in a chair, if you can't bring your hands like to the sides of the chair in the front, you can do these with your hands on your hips. And for folks on a block or on the floor, you can experiment with seeing how little weight you can have in your hands as you're reaching side to side. And if you want a challenge, you can lift your hands as we reach forwards through the middle, over to one leg, then back through the middle, leaning forwards as far as you can, over to the other leg. This is making our hip muscles do more of the work of supporting our torso versus our hands and arms supporting some of the weight of our torso as we lean side to side. So we'll go ahead and go one more trip towards each leg. Then the next time you're reaching back towards the middle for our straddle pancake forward fold, I'm gonna hang out in this position. So feeling the stretch, maybe in those inner thighs, maybe in the hamstrings, maybe a little bit of both. From here, we're gonna engage our hamstrings, make them a little bit stronger while they're in this lengthened position by pushing our heels into the floor. So from whatever position you're at, you're in your chair or on the floor, we're gonna smush both of our heels to the floor. Feel a little extra tension building in those hamstrings. Hold that tension. Keep constantly pushing your legs down for 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Relax those legs. You might be able to lean just a teeny bit farther forwards once you relax those hamstrings. We'll hold here for another moment or two. If you like, you can add a little sway side to side. I happen to find doing little wiggles while I move makes my muscles relax a little bit. If this just makes it harder for you, just hang out in your regular forward folds. You do not have to wiggle if that doesn't feel good in your body. we'll go ahead and slowly come on out for a moment. Shake out those legs. Let's do a little more work for our inner thighs. We'll do some variations of Frogger. Maybe work towards our middle splits, and we'll do one last straddle at the end once we've opened those inner thighs just a little bit more. So for our inner thighs, one of my favorite stretches is a Frogger stretch. Frogger stretch is essentially a middle split, but we're keeping our knees bent, which makes it a lot friendlier on the knees. If you've got sensitive knees, roll in your mat 1 or 2 times can give your knees a little bit more padding. Or if you're at home, you're welcome to literally put pillows under your knees if that makes it feel better. I'm gonna show this sideways so you can see the form for this one a little bit better. So starting kneeling, I'm gonna open up my knees out to the side. And I'm gonna have a 90-degree bend between my thigh and my shin. So my feet are underneath my knees. They're not hanging out together towards my butt. And for this exercise, we want to feel the stretch in our inner thighs. And depending how flexible your inner thighs are, if you've got tighter hips and your knees aren't very far apart, this is going to be more comfortable to be on your hands. If you've got more open hips and your hips are pretty low, this is probably going to be more comfortable with your elbows on the floor. You can pick. For this first round, we're going to start with our hips in line with our knees. And if you feel any pinching in the outsides of your hips, I want you to slide your knees closer together, lift your tailbone, and then try to open your knees out to the side. See if that pinching sensation goes away. From this position, let's add a little bit of movement. So feeling that stretch in the inner thighs, we're gonna rock our hips forwards just a little bit and backwards just a little bit. So getting all of our muscles in our hips used to supporting us in slightly different positions. And you might notice that you feel a better stretch with your butt sitting back towards your heels or your hips reaching forwards. If there's a particular hip position that feels like a deeper stretch in your inner thighs, go ahead and hold that position for a couple of breaths. Otherwise, you can keep rocking forwards and backwards. We're going to come back to bringing our hips to a neutral position. We're going to do 2 rounds of contracting and relaxing while we're here. So right now, this is a relaxed, very passive stretch. Gravity is just kind of giving our hips a little bit of a smush towards the floor. Our inner thighs theoretically are relaxed. They might be contracting a little bit, particularly if you have tight inner thighs. But we're going to make them contract a little bit more, make them stronger while they're in this lengthened position. So you're going to stay in the same shape. I want you just to start squeezing your knees together at like 30% power. Not so much that your knees actually move, just a little bit of an inner thigh squeeze so you feel some more tension in those inner thighs. Hold that for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Relax that tension. You can relax those inner thighs. You might be able to wiggle those knees a teeny bit farther apart, especially if you're not on a sticky mat. We're going to hold our passive stretch for another moment or two and do 1 more round of contracting. Just try to breathe into our hips, let those muscles relax as much as your body will allow. And it might not feel very relaxed, that's okay. We'll do 1 last round of contracting. So while all of our adductors or inner thigh muscles are nice and long, we're going to contract them, squeezing those inner thighs together just a little bit, like 3 out of 10 intensity on that squeeze, holding for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Relax that squeeze, relax those inner thighs. You can either stay in your Frogger stretch, or if you would like to try for your full middle split, you can kick one leg out to the side and then the other, sliding out to your middle split. So for our middle split, I want our toes, shin, knees and thighs pointing forwards, not rotated up towards the ceiling. As we hold here, either on our hands, on your elbows, or if you prefer your Frogger stretch, you can hang out in your Frogger stretch. We'll be here for about 20 more seconds. Taking a couple breaths. Looking to feel this a whole lot in the inner thighs. Folks with tight hamstrings, you might feel a little bit in the back of your thighs too. That's not incorrect. Breathe in here for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And then any way that feels comfortable, make your way back down to the ground. Shake out your legs if they need a shake out. Or my personal favorite hip reset is taking our feet a little wider than the mat, windshield wipering those knees, side to side. All right, so now that we've done a whole lot for our inner thighs, let's check back in on our straddle pancake one last time. So either sitting in your chair, if you're sitting in a chair, butt on the floor, or I was doing butt on a block, so I will keep my butt on a block. Making your way back to your straddle. So opening our legs out to the side, keeping our thighs, knees, and shins rotated towards the ceiling. Optional, little bend in those knees if you've got sensitive knees or tight hamstrings. And then we're gonna find that forward fold, trying to tilt our hips forwards. The rest of my upper body is just gonna follow my pelvis as we lean, looking to feel more of a stretch in those inner thighs and or those hamstrings. Hold here for 30 seconds. Taking a couple breaths. If you're someone who likes to wiggle while you stretch, I happen to find little side to side sway is A, a nice distraction, and B, often it lets me go a little bit deeper. Is as I'm doing this controlled movement, this is sending signals to my nervous system that we've got control here. This is fine. This is not a scary position that we accidentally fell into and that we are injured in. We've got all the muscular control to still do stuff here, which then makes my legs relax a little bit more. So we'll be here for our last 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and slowly lift your torso on up. Give your legs a shake. You can always use a hand assist if your legs need a little hand assist. Go through a couple windshield wipers if that feels good. And that'll wrap up all of our straddle and middle split work. So that'll wrap up our class for today. Awesome job if you made it the whole way through. Spoiler alert, you may be a little sore in your inner thighs or your glutes tomorrow if this is not the type of exercise or stretching that your body is used to. So I don't recommend doing the same recording every single day because we do so much strengthening in this class. This is a very good example of active flexibility where we're strengthening our muscles at their end range, whether it's the lengthened muscle like our hamstrings or it's the shortened muscle like our glutes. And muscles need time to recover when they've done strengthening. So feel free to let tomorrow be a rest day, or you could do a different flexibility class, work on shoulders or upper back, something where your legs get a total break. If you've got any questions on any of the exercises, particularly if anything hurts, nothing that we do should hurt, feel free to send me an email or reach out to me on Instagram. All that contact info is in the PDF from when you got access to this recording. And also if you've got progress pics, I'm always looking for progress pics of students. That kind of stuff makes my day when I hear from you all. So I hope you enjoy continuing to work through this recording. Please reach out if you've got questions, and I look forward to seeing you in future classes. Have a great rest of your day.